world wastes more energy per year than it actually uses. There's a lot of inefficiencies in that sort of chain from energy production to consumption. And a lot of energy ends up getting wasted, but it's kind of an invisible problem, right? You don't see it, and if you don't see it, you don't think about it, and it makes it hard to tackle. So yeah, we're all about energy made visible and making that sort of big problem much easier for folks to tackle at the individual household level.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CleanTechies Podcast. This is episode 52 of the show, and I'm your host, Silas Maynor, and I'm super thrilled to have the opportunity to bring you this show and very, very thankful to you for tuning in. So before we get into the details of today's episode, our ask of you is to please be sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, leave us a review, ask us any questions that you do have in the future that you'd like to hear on the show. We're always open to hearing your questions because we have this platform. We want to make sure we're helping people learn the things they want to. And then, of course, from our side, what we want to offer to you is that if you are a founder with specific needs, we're glad to make any introductions that we can. This could be intros to capital, possibly partnership opportunities, or maybe you're looking for talent. Whatever it is, definitely please reach out. It's my goal to help climate tech founders in any way I can, so feel free to reach out. Do not be shy. And with that, let's get into today's episodes. So today's episode is with James Henry, the Director of Growth and Sustainability at MyHEAT. MyHEAT is a Calgary-based energy software startup. They have a technology that produces heat maps on actually a city-wide level, and then they use that data to work in partnership with utilities and the energy consumers to make changes that result in long-term energy savings. So generally speaking, their goal is to reduce the amount of energy required to heat a space. So in this episode, James and I discussed a number of things, some of those being, of course, what MyHEAT is doing, how they collect their data, what the goals of the utilities are, and how they go about implementing their technology. We also discussed how this can help improve real estate valuations. And then I think what was probably the most interesting thing for me was their mission to basically essentially change public education on energy usage, which is a very, very tough thing to do, but they have some methods of tackling that. So really interesting things we discussed today. Of course, many other things in addition to this. But as always, before we get into the show, we do, of course, want to make special thanks to our sponsors, NextWave Partners. NextWave are experts in talent acquisition, recruitment, and retention across the climate tech, renewables, ESG, and technology spaces globally. So if your team is growing, you're looking for specific talent, or perhaps you are looking to make a career change, feel free to reach out to NextWave. You can do that a couple different ways. You can reach out through their website at next-wavepartners.com or reach out to one of their consultants directly via their LinkedIn page. And big thanks to NextWave for making this possible. And without any further delay, let's get into the show. All right, welcome to the show, James. How are you doing today?
Yeah, thanks, Silas. I am doing pretty good. Can't complain.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really glad to have you on. I'm actually pretty excited. I think this is a little bit newer. I don't think we've had anybody specifically on with this type of technology. So I guess why don't you just give us, to start off, give us a summary of kind of what you're doing, about your background, and kind of how you ended up getting into the space.
Yeah, sure. And happy to do that. And thanks for kind of inviting me to be a part of this. So I'm currently the Director of Growth and Sustainability for MyHEAT. So MyHEAT is a relatively small energy software startup based out of Calgary in Alberta, Canada. And so I'm happy to elaborate on what MyHEAT does. But since you've also asked about my background, so I joined MyHEAT about a year and a half ago. And prior to that, I was at Google in Ireland and Canada. So at Google, I was leading a variety of environmental sustainability initiatives, including some that folks might be familiar with. So Project Sunroof, which is a rooftop solar insights API. I was leading partnerships for that for Canada, and also partnerships for Google's Environmental Insights Explorer for Canada as well. And then just a variety of other initiatives. And my sort of education and broader background is in marketing, advertising, communications. So that's kind of the world that I come from. And that leads me to kind of some of the skills and things that I bring to the work that I do for MyHEAT.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So why don't you, I think probably best, could you summarize kind of roughly at a high level view, what is MyHEAT doing? And then I'd be keen to understand how you ended up getting to the space in general. Like, what was the impetus to do so?
Yeah, for sure. So at a high level, so as I mentioned, MyHEAT's an energy software. We're a SaaS startup. And truly, our purpose is to reduce the amount of energy required to heat and cool buildings around the world. So that's kind of the purpose. That's what we're aiming to achieve. And so the way that we do this is with remote sensing, specifically with airborne thermal imagery that identifies heat loss for individual buildings at a city scale or larger. And we use this imagery that we collect to provide sort of a unique visual heat loss map for each individual building, and a heat rating for each home to allow homeowners to sort of compare their relative heat loss to their neighbors or to homes of similar sizes. So that's sort of in a nutshell what it is that MyHEAT does, and we're all about energy made visible. So it's, the world wastes more energy per year than it actually uses. There's a lot of inefficiencies in that sort of chain from energy production to consumption, and a lot of energy ends up getting wasted. But it's kind of an invisible problem, right? You don't see it, and if you don't see it, you don't think about it, and it makes it hard to tackle. So yeah, we're all about energy made visible and making that sort of big problem much easier for folks to tackle at the individual household level.
Mm-hmm. So how did you end up getting into the space? Like what motivated you to come work in the climate tech space in general? Is there a backstory there, kind of maybe a turning point? Whether some people have it during their education experience or some specific instance in their career. I'd be keen to understand that.
Yeah. So I mean, MyHEAT's in the energy efficiency business, but I can't truthfully say that I knew a lot about energy efficiency before I joined. But I was definitely keen to sort of work in the climate tech space. So I think, my story is probably, as a kid, I was the kid that would watch nature documentaries over cartoons, like David Attenborough was my hero. That was just always kind of what I was interested in. And always kind of being outside and exploring, looking for insects and things like that. But my family was in business. They ran their own business. They went to school for business, so that was kind of my frame of reference. And so that's what I did. I took a business bachelor's degree. I did a master's in marketing, and then ultimately the work that I started doing at Google was in marketing and advertising. So that was my world. But when Google hired its first sustainability lead, who is now the chief sustainability officer, Kate Brandt, I sort of noticed that she had started doing a really great job of telling Google's story internally among employees and externally. And it was probably one of those moments in your career that you look back and you're like, oh, okay, that was the impetus for this move, or that was the impetus for this pivot. Because it wasn't up until that point that I realized that, this love I had for nature and the environment and for preserving it actually had an intersection with my professional life and with the career. And so it was at that point that I started to sort of pay more attention to what was happening. What were the problems that the world was facing, and what could I do about it? And that was really the moment that I started focusing my efforts on trying to, pivot into the climate space, work on various aspects of sustainability to kind of, cut my teeth, to kind of learn the ins and outs of different sectors, to learn the vocabulary of different sectors. And that's all that's what really set me on the path that I'm on now.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I think that is fascinating. Always hearing kind of the realization that you can make a living and also do things that are that's quite good for the environment. I think that I've seen a lot of people want to find that, especially nowadays. A lot of people trying to find where they can fit in, but it maybe wasn't so too long ago. I guess going back to MyHEAT in general, could you kind of walk us through? I'm curious the process of how you collect this data And then could you maybe just walk us through the whole process of how it's actually distributed and how it's actually used and becomes useful?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a pretty unique technology as far as the specific application, but in terms of the way that we acquire the data we use, it's airborne thermal imagery, as I mentioned, right? So essentially what we're doing is we're operating a turboprop plane, flying at somewhere between 2 to 4,000 feet in the air. And attached to that plane is a very high resolution thermal infrared sensor. So it's a really specialized piece of equipment. There's, I think, less than maybe 10 of these in the world. They're used for remote sensing applications like, wildfire detection and management, and some military applications as well. And just so happens that it's the perfect piece of machinery to be able to attach to a plane, fly an entire city in a couple of nights, and collect information about the relative difference in temperatures per pixel that it sees down below, and map that to rooftops to detect heat loss. So that's kind of the basic method of collection. And I think my data science colleagues would be quick to say that I'm vastly oversimplifying a lot of the considerations that go into that. There are certain environmental conditions that we have to take into account when acquiring our data. So typically, we are acquiring data at night, first of all, so to allow for any kind of residual daytime, solar loading on rooftops to dissipate, and for that rooftop temperature to kind of normalize. We're typically collecting in the spring or the fall, kind of on the shoulder with winter. We want to make sure there's no residual snow or rain, water sitting on any rooftops, as that can affect the image. We're typically collecting at around in and around 0 degrees Celsius, which I think is maybe 30, 35 Fahrenheit. And we're doing that to be able to get the best temperature differential, the best read of that differential between the rooftop temperature and the ambient environmental temperature as well. And so by collecting at that season and at night, folks are typically going to have their heating source turned on, and we're going to get that best read between the heat that's being emitted from what we see in the image from that rooftop versus the ambient temperature around it.
Okay, so then once the data is collected, how is it processed, and then kind of who ends up purchasing your software and your data, and then how is it used on the other end?
Yeah. Okay, cool. Lots of questions. It's great. So in terms of how it's processed, so as you might imagine, this is the first step we're collecting is just a thermal infrared image, right? Which is largely kind of a grayscale image if you were to just look at it, lots of kind of black, white, gray tones. So, when we're flying, we're collecting everything below, right? We're collecting images of water, roads, trees and forests and buildings. So the very first step is to deploy some of our kind of proprietary machine learning on this imagery for image detection and recognition, to be able to say, this is a building or this is not, this is water, this is pavement, etc. We're also at that point pulling in some third-party data sources to help with the identification of buildings as well, and start to effectively draw the building outlines so that we can isolate buildings from everything else. So that's sort of step one. Step two would be also then using more of our kind of in-house machine learning skills that we've been building up over the last number of years to be able to automatically classify the buildings. So, residential, commercial, industrial, and then within residential, what's single family, multifamily, what's a detached, a semi-detached, a townhouse, a condo. So classifying those buildings and then clustering them according to their classifications. So we currently predominantly work with our product in the residential sector. So those are the buildings that we're interested in. And then because we're also providing a comparative heat rating, a score of 1 to 10 that helps homeowners understand the relative efficiency of their home, we need to be able to compare a home to similar homes, right? It doesn't make sense to compare a detached single family home building to a condo building of 5 floors and multiple residents, right? Those two buildings have very different footprints and occupant levels and energy usage. So that automatic classifying and clustering that we do helps us better determine the relative heat ratings and kind of energy footprints of those buildings as well. So we're at this point, we've processed the thermal imagery, we've determined what's a building and what type of building it is, et cetera. We then have a number of folks on our team who are GIS specialists who will sort of whip that all up into a really easy to navigate map, essentially, right? So the product that we ultimately build is a map, and it looks a lot like Google Maps. There's a search bar for an address. There's, you've got that bird's eye view that you can zoom in and start to see buildings appear and click and navigate. And so that map is really kind of that high level picture at a city scale of all the buildings that we've mapped and all of the relative heat loss maps applied to each roof and heat rating. But then you have the ability to go all the way into an individual building, pull up its kind of profile to be able to investigate, where are some of the potential problem areas as we're observing them in terms of the heat loss from that building. What's the heat rating? How does that compare to others? And then if we have other data sets like, census data, for example, we can compare at the neighborhood or census tract level and say, this neighborhood, these buildings are built on average, most of them in 1970. Here's how this neighborhood compares to this newer neighborhood that was built maybe 10 years ago. The average income in this area is X or Y, and you can start to draw some really interesting insights to inform ultimately the interventions that you want to make. And so that's kind of the moving into your question of, how is this delivered and who is this for? So we partner predominantly with gas and electric utilities across North America at the moment. And we use these maps to essentially promote energy literacy, to educate their customers on energy efficiency, to really engage them in the conversation on energy efficiency, and help them reduce energy loss by pinpointing inefficient areas of their home. And so our utilities are the ones who kind of invest in this platform, and we work with them to design a program, drawing on all of those useful insights, and then working on sort of personalized messaging to their customers, in this case, the homeowners, the renters, the people who live in these buildings, to help them understand, hey, you've potentially got some heat loss occurring in your building. Here's what you can do about it. And by the way, as your utility provider, we have 1, 2, and 3 number of different programs or rebates or incentives that you're eligible to apply for to help you make these upgrades, to get a free smart thermostat, to add insulation, to get a home energy audit done, to replace your windows and doors, to take any number of actions that are going to be beneficial in reducing their energy consumption at home.
So I guess obviously I would assume there's a few different ways that this plays out, but how does it typically work for the homeowners, right? Because I'm assuming that the utility is the one oftentimes footing the bill in some way, whether it's a form of a rebate or an actual helping them to afford the cost of upgrades and improving their buildings. How does that typically look?
Can you elaborate on the question a little bit?
How is it typically administered for the homeowner? If I'm a homeowner in a suburb of Toronto or something, right? And I want to say my utility is participating in this, and I want to, be involved and improve my heat.
Yeah.
What does the typical process look like for me?
So for the homeowner, the typical process is, you may or may not be aware of some of the programs and rebates that your utility currently has to offer. And in most cases, actually, we find that a lack of awareness of these initiatives is one of the biggest stumbling blocks or the biggest barriers for homeowners. It's again, when it's not a visible problem, it's not often thought about. You might think about it, when you get your bill every month or every few months, it's quite a visible problem on paper at that point, but it's still hard to draw the connection between, okay, my bills are higher than I want them to be, or they're higher than normal. I have to keep my heating on longer. It feels cold in the house. Those are all problems and pain points that the homeowner feels, but drawing a line and drawing a connection to actions they can take to improve those situations, to reduce their energy consumption, to save money on their bills, it's not obvious always to them. you have some folks who are very energy literate and are aware of the things that they can do and may or may not have had a home energy audit before. But the vast majority of folks, and we see this in surveys that we run, are often just not aware of what's available to them. And so part of what we do is use that really unique visual imagery, this personalized heat loss map of someone's rooftop, to sort of engage someone and hook them and say, hey, here's your home. This is this really interesting thermal infrared heat map that suggests you've got some heat loss going on, and here are some possible reasons for that, and here are some actions that you can take. So that's kind of how the path works for homeowners, and all of this is provided by their utility partner, as MyHEAT work with them to say, here's what we know about the homes in your area. Here's some other information that we've pulled in about the census tract, the census blocks, demographics, et cetera. Here's the lowest hanging fruit for you as a utility and for your customers, the homeowners or the renters. And so we'll design a program together that has personalized marketing outreach with audience segmentation. And we'll send out mailers, we'll send out emails, we'll run digital ads to engage with those homeowners and renters, present the imagery and the information and get that in front of them. And then kind of our platform takes it from there to educate them and help them take the next steps.
Interesting. So that seems like that's actually a very coordinated and difficult task to get it in front of people, right? Because it's not like you're, maybe you can't just have somebody go door to door with everybody and say, hey, listen, I don't think many people want to do that anyways. But that's interesting. So I guess then, I guess I'm just kind of curious if you could summarize, like, what is then generally the goal? Because I think we've talked about this, in the past in our first conversation a little bit about this, but like, what is the true goal of all of this? And then the engagement with the homeowners, like what is the goal from the utilities perspective?
Yeah, I mean, from the utilities perspective, there can be multiple goals, but I think one of the core goals is driving increased awareness of and participation in their various energy efficiency programs. So as I said, oftentimes these programs do exist, and oftentimes budget is allocated to these programs. So let's say utility says, hey, we have $50 million that we're allocating to this program. We have conversations with some utilities and they might say, we've only spent like 10% of this and we're a year into the program. And as it often goes, you need to spend the budget or it goes away. And beyond that, it's not just wanting to spend the budget, it's wanting to help your customers understand energy loss more. It's wanting to help them take action. It's wanting to help them reduce their consumption and save money on their bills. So there's a lot of underlying motivators, but I think at its core, if you were to boil it all down to one simple kind of motivation, it would be to increase awareness and participation among homeowners and renters, and make sure they're aware of the programs and rebates that they are already eligible to avail of.
And you said that a lot of the typical things that will go through is changing out windows, maybe increasing insulation, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think if you think of the energy efficiency spectrum and all of the different things that you can do, there's a couple of really simple actions that a lot of folks have already taken. So for example, replacing your bulbs with, very efficient LEDs, for example. A lot of utilities kind of went through that push a couple of years ago. That was a really low hanging fruit. I think the smart thermostat concept is gaining a lot of ground. I know you interviewed Aaron from Nest a couple of weeks ago, and they're doing great work along with Ecobee and others. So that area of the market is doing well. And again, it's easy, right? It's a relatively easy energy efficiency upgrade to make. The ones that we're typically hoping to address in partnership with our utility partners are the energy efficiency upgrades that are a little bit more meaty. They're a little bit more long-term. They're a bit more challenging to tackle than, say, replacing light bulbs or installing a thermostat. So they would be, for example, getting a detailed home energy audit to understand where exactly in your home are you losing energy. I didn't realize before joining MyHEAT that you can lose a lot of energy through your light switches or your light fixtures, say your pot light fixtures in a living room or a ceiling, if those aren't properly insulated, they can leak a lot of warm air that you're pushing into your room and just leak that out through cavity walls and elsewhere into your home. So that might be one action, is the energy audit. Other times it's window and door replacement, it's adding increased insulation. It might also be upgrading to energy efficient appliances. That will kind of depend on the goals that our utility partners have. When we're entering into the partnership, we do a lot of kind of goal discovery to figure out what is it exactly that you want to drive. Because once we get the person engaged with their heat loss map, we have the conversation through our platform, right? We engage in kind of promoting energy literacy, and we have a number of different calls to action that we provide and make available on our platform. And so the utility can say, hey, we have 3 calls to action. We have 3 programs we want this person to be aware of, and they are X, Y, and Z. Or they can just say, we just have one. We only have one thing that we want to move, and this is it. And so we can customize our platform to accommodate any of those different KPIs or programs that they want to focus on.
Yeah, interesting. Do you have any data on quantifying kind of how much this energy waste is costing? Maybe, I don't know if it's on a larger scale, it might be hard to quantify that, or maybe on an individual home kind of scale, like what is the typical actual cost of not doing these things?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a really big and it's a really tricky question. I think if you asked the average person paying their utility bills every month, they likely wouldn't know how much wasted energy in the home is costing them. But I think if they had to guess, anywhere from $50 to $300 or more, maybe on their bills. So in some of our past projects, in working with our utility partner, we've also integrated historical consumption data into our platform. So now not only do we have a really good read of the heat loss from the building itself, the heat rating from a lot of other factors and proprietary data that we use, but we also have the consumption data. So we can see, is a home consuming very little energy, but has a high heat rating, meaning that they're losing a lot of heat, right? So they're not consuming a lot, but what they are consuming, a lot of it is being lost, right? Or are they consuming a lot, but they're not actually losing very much, right? So that would suggest that, they're maybe a larger home, there's maybe more people at home, lots more going on, but they're actually not losing very much. They're quite an efficient home. So, in past projects, we've experimented with calling out, here's how much you could save. And we can do that because we have an understanding of the correlation between the heat rating, the 1 to 10 score, and the consumption. So we're able to determine, for example, that every increase in the heat rating, every one increase in the heat rating on that scale of 1 to 10 was equivalent to about a 3% increase in natural gas consumption. So we're able to then kind of correlate and say, if your home's an 8, if we were to take that down to a 6 through energy efficiency measures, that would reduce your energy consumption by up to 9%. Did I say 3%? 9% natural gas consumption, and therefore this equates to X dollars in savings per month. And so we experimented with that, and we said, if for some homes you can save up to $150 a month on your bill. And making that really tangible for the average person is really, we found to be really quite powerful in driving behavioral change and driving action on energy efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's interesting because obviously, I think we talked about this when we first connected about this topic in general, was the behavioral change issue, right? Like this is something that, again, like you said, they pay the bill once a month. Maybe they kind of have a moan about the cost, but if they were to do kind of more permanent upgrades and maybe have some other way of being able to see this data and quantify it, and then also compare it, as you mentioned, compared to others, because how many people truly know how well their house is performing, I guess you could say, from an energy efficiency perspective compared to others, right? Nobody's like, oh yeah, my house is terrible with energy, because unless they're going and talking to their neighbor or maybe several of their neighbors, about
Yeah.
their energy bill, which I don't think many people do, to my knowledge.
You'd be surprised, especially when energy bills are on the increase like they are at the moment. It very quickly becomes a topic of conversation. Um, but yeah, I think the average person will have an idea of how much energy they're consuming and if their home is energy efficient or not. They'll definitely have an understanding and a conception of that. But where they often don't see the full picture is how it compares. Is that relative scale to others, to other similar homes based on maybe the year that they were built, or which company or which contracting company built those homes. What was the building code in that decade or at that time in that municipality, and how did that affect maybe how those homes were built and what their energy efficiency looks like. um, so we find that comparison really powerful, and we find it really powerful to motivate action as well. So it's a fairly common behavioral nudging technique, drawn from behavioral science, to compare someone to another in some form of rating or scale. And even for the folks that sometimes aren't particularly pleased to see that their home is worse off than another, on this rating scale of 1 to 10. They might get a little bit kind of riled up, but that's kind of the point, right? Like that behavioral nudging is working if that happens, right? That comparison is working. They're paying attention, and they're kind of motivated to understand why they're performing worse off than others. And then they're often motivated to take action to improve on that as well. So what we actually see happen is, we may do our data acquisition with our flyover, on day one of year one, and in year four of our partnership with the utility, by that time, we've had so many requests from our utilities customers, the homeowners and renters in that area, saying like, hey, I've checked out my map, and I've done X, Y, and Z energy efficiency upgrades. I've added my thermostat, I've replaced my windows and doors, I've added some insulation in the attic. I want to see what my rating is again. I want to see how I compare. And so we see that really, really often. And so we know that that's a strong kind of behavioral nudge that actually drives people to want to take action on something, as I said, that's kind of tricky to take action on. It's not as easy as installing a thermostat or replacing, your light bulbs for LEDs.
Yeah, I guess I would be kind of interested to understand from an incentives perspective for new builds, right? Because obviously this is easiest to do upfront. I know when we were building my house growing up, my dad was a builder where he insulated our house a lot. We live in the middle.
Right.
My parents are from Wisconsin, right? So
Yeah.
that was a big factor of being able to, right, how much are we going to have to put into this house for the heating. So are there any incentives that are being run for new builders? I guess maybe if there's regulations, anything that you're aware of in the space. I'm just kind of curious to see how can we incentivize these things to be done properly from the outset, so that's not necessarily a pain in the neck later on.
Yeah, there's definitely huge value in doing that from the very beginning. Obviously, it makes a lot more sense to make a home as energy efficient as possible right up front. I think if you look at advancements to building codes over time, across North America, they're generally trending in the right direction. The energy efficiency field is definitely not static. It's improving all the time. There's new knowledge kind of being gained. There's new materials being produced that have higher insulation properties than others, for example. And then you have things like the LEED design certification and guidelines as well that encourage green building, responsible building, buildings that recirculate their energy, capture and recirculate, or just generally are more efficient to begin with. And so generally speaking, you would hope that most new buildings are energy efficient, but the fact remains that the vast majority of the buildings in the building stock that needs the most attention from an energy efficiency perspective today are the buildings that have already been built, right? That older building stock. Depending on where you are, there might be buildings in your area that are from, the late 1800s or early 1900s. if you live in an area that had a lot of urban sprawl, you might see a lot of homes that were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And the building codes back then were certainly a lot different from the building codes today, in good and bad ways. So I think the biggest opportunity we have from a climate perspective is to address the older building stock with these deep energy retrofits, and by motivating as many people as possible to become aware of energy efficiency, to care about it, and to care enough to want to take action and to make that action simple. That's the biggest bang for the buck that we have, over making sure that new buildings are adhering to a certain level of energy efficiency. The old building stock just far outweighs the new buildings at the moment, and it needs a lot of attention.
Yeah, I guess I think that from a, maybe it's very hard to quantify this point, but if you're saving money on your energy bill, that can be marketed as, whether you're building new homes or selling your existing home, kind of money saved and into the pocket of the owner, right? Yeah. But I'd also be curious if there's any kind of, if you're seeing any trends towards looking at this data to help value homes, especially in a neighborhood, right? This home had its retrofits done, it's more energy efficient. Are there things being done in that nature? Is that a trend you're seeing at all? Are people looking to use your software in that space? Just kind of generally speaking, I'm curious about that valuation aspect.
Yeah, it's a good question. We get a lot of interest in our technology and our maps from the real estate industry. So we know there's a captive market for being able to assess this invisible problem at an individual building level, to inform maybe not necessarily the valuation of the home, but certainly the prospective buyer's interest in buying that home. I think more increasingly than ever, which is a great thing, prospective buyers are looking for homes that are more sustainable, that are more energy efficient, not just for their wallet, but to know that if they're buying a new home, they're kind of doing their part for the climate by trying to buy a home that is highly energy efficient and will produce as many greenhouse gases in its day-to-day operations. So we definitely see interest. We see interest from people looking for a new home, and we get emails about that all the time. We have a number of public maps available in our home province of Alberta, and in some cases where we've taken maps down because we're working on them, we're adding new data or we're adjusting the data, we get a lot of emails that say, hey, where did the map go? I was using this to scope new homes in my area because I'm buying a new home, and this was really helpful, and now I don't have it. Where is it? So that interest is definitely there, and we see it from real estate companies in various sectors as well. But I think truthfully for us, we're still a relatively small company, so we're just laser focused on the utility market. So working with gas and electric utilities across North America, energy efficiency is already well on their radar. In lots of places, there's significant investment allocated to energy efficiency. These utilities, they have their kind of eye on the prize, so to speak. And so they're just kind of our ideal customer in terms of the product market fit, and in terms of the traction that we've been gaining and growing a lot as a company by really doubling down on our focus with utilities. Occasionally we will work with a municipality, and we did that more in the past. But as you can imagine, some of the costs involved with sort of getting a plane up in the air, a pilot and a technician, the sensor, which there's not many of those in the world. There are some fairly, those upfront costs are a little bit more than what municipalities typically kind of have available. Whereas utilities, they have a lot of budget allocated for these kind of efforts and ways to improve their programs and their outreach. So for us, it just makes more sense to focus there than in the real estate industry. But who knows? At some point in the future, we know the interest there, so that could definitely be an area to expand.
Yeah, and I think it's quite interesting. Obviously, if you look at it from the perspective, a lot of people talk about reducing energy and of course the energy transition for the grid. But if this could be implemented pretty widely and with great success across all utilities, hypothetically, you could really reduce the kind of need. I would assume. Do you have numbers on that, on how much, hypothetically, the existing grid and maybe if you just have a region, if it was energy efficiency was raised to the maximum extent, how much that would reduce the load on the grid?
Yeah, we have some figures which can speak to that. It would depend on kind of how you define, measuring load on the grid, because we also work with gas utilities and on the gas side as well, right? But what you're describing is this concept of reducing downstream energy consumption effectively to delay or mitigate entirely the need for investments, really capital intensive investments in infrastructure to provide energy, right? So if you're an electric utility and your grid is already constrained in certain areas, because as I know on another one of your podcast episodes, you talked about this grid, this fragile beast, and how, as we look to reinvigorate the grid and improve it to where we need it to be, there's lots of challenges along the way. So if you're an electric utility with grid constraints, reducing downstream energy consumption can be a massive benefit to delaying or mitigating those really intensive investments to improve your grid infrastructure. And the same on the gas side. So, laying down new pipes and gas infrastructure is also incredibly capital intensive. And so, it's a no-brainer. It's a really kind of quick win. It can be a really quick win to focus on reducing downstream energy consumption first, before kind of moving straight to investing in your infrastructure. And so depending on where you are, typically in the US, but depending on where you are in North America, there are utilities who are looking for innovative solutions to avoid those capital intensive investments. And if you're an electric utility, you would describe that as a non-wires alternative. And if you're a gas utility on the gas side, describe that as a non-pipes alternative. And so, we have projects with utilities on both of those sides of the house. And so we're working with both electric and gas utilities to really double down, supercharge energy efficiency programs, drive some deep energy savings with homeowners across North America, and in doing so, alleviate the pressure on the grid, alleviate the need to invest in more expensive gas pipeline infrastructure. And so those not only bring benefits to the homeowners, but also to the climate, right? Just in terms of the footprint of the infrastructure itself, the footprint of that increased energy production, and really the cheapest and most abundant energy source that we have available is the energy we've already produced. We're just wasting it, and we're wasting it in such huge quantities. So that's the really meaty problem that we're solving for, but the one that provides such a lot of opportunity as well.
Yeah, that's quite interesting to think about some of these things, because it's really hard to quantify it. But now that there's ways to quantify some of these things, we'll probably see additional solutions being created right across various areas. Maybe I guess just kind of, well, I guess I have two more major questions. What from a kind of public education standpoint, what are some of the things that you kind of view as ways that we can help people, homeowners, students, people as they're kind of, learning about how the world works and becoming adults and going into the world? How can we help educate people on all of these items and just basically create more awareness? Because I feel like if there's a greater awareness, there could be more kind of push from the consumer side, to make sure that they're partaking in their utilities programs and just making sure that they're really kind of being part of the solution, rather than just being oblivious to the problem.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if you can address the education piece, make people more aware of the things that they can do, it can have a huge knock-on effect. So I think, part of what we aim to do with every one of our projects is to really promote energy literacy. And if you want to rephrase that, simply just improve education around energy efficiency, what it means with respect to reducing energy consumption in your home, and the ways that you can do that and the support that you have, right? So, we definitely don't just sort of ship a map, we put it in the hands of our utilities, and we say, okay, cool, we delivered, thanks a lot, we'll see you later. It's really about building a partnership for a number of years that says, who are which homes are the lowest hanging fruit this year and next year and the year after based on their energy efficiency. Who are the people that we need to educate? How can we do that? What do we want to tell them? How do we use this information, this imagery, and this rating to explain what's actually happening and the reasons why they might be losing energy in their home? And then providing them with resources to continue to learn more and to continue to understand what's going on. So I think it's really important, and I think we're trying to do our part in that energy education and energy literacy. And I think the more that utilities especially invest in solutions that drive awareness of their programs, the better the education outcomes overall. Because again, from some of the surveys that we've ran and some of the market research we've done, awareness is sort of one of the number one problems. People just aren't aware that problems exist, or they're not aware of the solutions, or they're not aware of the support that they have. And it's because it's this invisible problem. So it's, I think making it visible for people really helps. And, it's interesting, I think for me about, before I joined MyHEAT, I didn't know much about energy efficiency. I had never really thought about heat loss and energy loss in homes. About a week or two after I started, I was walking down the street and I found myself looking at each home and immediately just picturing what their rooftop heat loss map would look like. It was kind of one of those moments where it's one of those things where you just can't unsee it, right? So I think when you see it, it's very easy to imagine, oh, what about that home? What about that home? You can just kind of picture their rooftop, and you can picture the heat loss just escaping. It's almost as if you have these like heat loss shades that you put on, and your world is instantly changed, and you look at things completely differently, and you think about things completely differently. So whether a curse or a benefit, I don't know, but that it's just forever burned in my mind now. And so I think the more people that we can show this imagery to, because it is so fascinating, I think the more people we can reach and educate, drive that awareness, drive that engagement in programs, and help people to kind of spread that knowledge with others as well. And I'll mention one more just quick story on this. I think our CEO, Darren, he likes to talk about the concept of, if you're at a party with friends, not that many of us have been at parties with friends over the last couple of years, but next time you're at a party with friends, just imagine yourself trying to have a conversation with someone about energy and energy efficiency and heat loss in your home, right? You might get a couple of yawns, and people might politely engage with you for a minute or two, and then they'll just go and find a more interesting conversation at the party. But if you have this really interesting image, this blue to red scale showing all of the hotspots on your rooftop and the areas that are losing more heat than others, and it's the home that you're standing in, it's immediately way more engaging and a much better place to start a conversation from. So he always thinks about, how do we make energy efficiency sexy, and is this something that people would want to talk about at a party? And I think the answer for what we provide is yes. And so hopefully that's a really good catalyst for that kind of education and starting these conversations.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. Generally, this whole idea of when you start to see, in this case, the world through your infrared tinted glasses, you kind of like be unable to go back, right? This is what it was for me. Like there were so many problems and so many things I just wasn't aware of, right? The solutions to the climate tech problem that, was kind of dismissed by a lot of people I knew growing up, is once you start to realize that there's amazing solutions out there, and there's just so many like much smarter ways to do business, it suddenly becomes so obvious, and you say, why wouldn't we do this, right? So I think that, to me, I'm always super fascinated by just the financial aspects of these things, because it's not even that it's just better for the world. It gets to a point where almost all these technologies are just better business, right? Because it's efficient, and yeah, maybe there's upfront costs, but it's just like investing in anything, right? You have return on that investment. Maybe one last thing wanted to ask is, what are some of your pieces of advice for people, young professionals kind of entering into the climate tech space and maybe trying to find their way? Maybe they're specifically interested in something like this. I just kind of keen to hear your general thoughts about this and advice for young professionals.
Yeah, I'd love to answer that question. It's kind of quickly become my personal mission to encourage as many people in my sphere of influence as possible to come and work on climate, because it's just so important. We need more people than ever, and we need them yesterday. So I think the advice that I would give is, to first of all shake off any preconception that you have that you can't work on climate, that you can't get a job in sustainability, because it is absolutely a core belief of mine that every single person has skills that are relevant, that are useful, and that are applicable to working on climate in some way, shape, or form. Um, I think a couple of years ago, before I started my journey, I thought, I'm not a climate scientist. I don't have a PhD in, climate modeling or earth sciences. Like, I'm not sure how I can help. But once it clicked that, oh, hang on, I've got a bunch of different skills here that I can apply, I started to see opportunity in many places. So figuring that out is really important. I would also say figuring out what's your unique value proposition, right? Like, you take your skills that you have and think about who you are as a person. Do you like talking to people? Do you like working with data? Are you really motivated to do solo work? Do you work better as a team? Are you a great communicator? What is it about you that makes you unique? And kind of combine that with your skills, especially if you're looking to break into the sector. Because I think you need to be able to articulate well the skills that you have, and what makes you unique, and the value that you can bring. So that would be the second thing. I have a whole kind of framework that I recently developed for helping people work in climate. But those are kind of two of the main things, because once you have those, you can then figure out, what part of sustainability do I want to work in? Is it renewable energy? Is it policy? Is it environmental justice? Is it renewables or mobility and EVs? But if you have your skills and unique value prop, and you figure out the sector that you're interested in, you can go and kind of pitch yourself. You can network. You can help people quickly understand the value that you can bring to working on climate. And it definitely helped for me, and I think people that I talk to, it's definitely helping them figure out how they can pivot into this space as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's quite good advice, actually. I've seen a lot of people struggle with that in recruiting, that they're looking to get in, but they have the kind of preconceived ideas that there's only a couple ways that can be done, right? So I think that's good for people to explore. But man, well, I really appreciate you coming on. I think this has been pretty great conversation. I definitely encourage people to reach out to understand, especially check if your utility is doing something like this, right? Everybody should
Absolutely.
look into this. Potentially there's savings to be had for you, and money to be in your pockets. You can afford the rising cost of Netflix or whatever it might be, right? But anyways, yeah, exactly. Any final thoughts, James?
Just thanks for having us on. We're always keen to tell our story, and I think the more people that we can tell our story to, if you picture ourselves at a party and trying to make energy efficiency sexy, that's we're happy to do that however we can. So no, yeah, just thanks for having us on and letting us tell that story.
Absolutely. You have to print some of those shirts and start selling them to raise awareness, man. But all right. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on. We'll have to have you on again in the future and see how things go.
Thanks, Silas. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining in today and listening today. Please definitely let us know what your thoughts on the show were. If you have any questions or things you want to share with us, you can reach out. Of course, please do share this with somebody else who might find it interesting. Perhaps you know somebody who actually might be a good partner for James and for what they're doing at MyHEAT. Definitely feel free to reach out to myself or James directly to facilitate that, as we really need a lot of collaboration to make this work, to make the climate change, bring these climate solutions to the table and make things happen. And then, of course, if you are joining us for the first time, we do ask, please, of course, subscribe and turn on notifications to be made aware of future episodes as we're putting these out. It depends, usually weekly, sometimes twice a week, but depending on kind of the frequency of how many guests we're getting on. And then, of course, if you enjoyed today's episode, we really appreciate you leaving us a review. If there were things you did not like, please reach out directly to me, and I'm glad to take those suggestions and implement them in the future to improve the show. If you are interested in becoming a sponsor or want to collaborate in some way, please feel free to reach out to me. My email can be found in the description. And then if you want to get more involved, you can consider joining the Slack channel that we've created for other climate tech professionals. And you can follow us on our LinkedIn page as well to interact with a lot of the people. That's where our main audience is when we post. So definitely feel free to connect there as well. And then just a quick note on our next episode. Next episode will be with Jason Ethier from Greentown Labs. And we're discussing what they are doing as an accelerator / incubator for climate tech startups. So this conversation was really exciting for me because I'm extremely fascinated by the complexities of running an organization like this. So be sure to tune in next time for that. And until then, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Thank you so much for joining in to the CleanTechies podcast on a regular basis. We really appreciate the support, and we will see you next time on CleanTechies the Podcast.